After yesterday's class, it was clear to me that the concept of manipulating cameras is a bit of a sticky point. So I thought I'd put together this short video to walk through the concepts in a little bit more detail and in a way that you can always go back and stop the video, rewind as necessary until the concept clicks with you guys. Concepts are new and they're fairly simple, but because they're very new and because we're talking about 3D spaces, they tend to be a little bit more difficult to click with most students. So do not feel bad because it's not clicking with you. It's not uncommon. However, once it clicks, you'll notice how easy it is to manipulate things in 3D space, and more likely than not, you will start making use of them quite often. So that said, I have created this composition where I have these 5 shapes. I have parented this little shape right here to shape 1, and that is so that when I apply a rotation to shape 1, shape layer 1, the other one rotates around it, and that's just to differentiate so that you see something in space as we do what we're about to do. And I've also added a little bit of script to make it loop after the 4-second mark, so it keeps on looping. So nothing new on that from what we've seen in class. What I want to do at this point, though, is I want to turn all these layers into 3D layers, and so I'll select them all, and I will turn on their switch so that they'll become 3D layers. At this point, then I'm going to open up their position value, their position transformation value, and I am going to place them in space, pushing them towards the back. So what does that mean? I'm going to push them out into Z space. For the top one, I am going to send it all the way out to about 8,000 pixels. And then I am going to actually let me send the first one to 8,000 pixels. So that's the one that has the little rotating shape next to it. So I'll send this one to 8,000 pixels. Then this one, the second layer, shape 2, went together with shape 1 because they are parented. Shape 3 then becomes the next one that I'm going to push, and that will be at 6,000 pixels. Shape 4 I am going to place at 4,000 pixels, and shape 5 I'm going to make it 2,000 pixels. Okay, so basically I've staggered these, and if I look at my composition, let me switch my composition from active camera to top view, and then I zoom out, you'll see that my layers have been positioned all the way up here. So this is my shape layers 1 and 2. This is shape layer 3, shape layer 4, shape layer 5. By the way, if you want to space out things in this view, you can also do that by using your gizmo tool, the little arrows. So you notice that when I roll over the arrow tool with whatever is selected, I have access to that gizmo, and I can go ahead and move them in this view as well. So it doesn't have to be from the front view or from the active camera only. That said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage that I am in this space, in this view, and I'm going to zoom out to show everything. I'm going to move this guy slightly to the left. I am going to move this guy slightly to the right. So let me go ahead and select it, wait for the constraint, which there it is, the X on the mouse, and then this one I'm going to move slightly to the right. So let me go back to my active camera, and you'll see basically what we've done. Let me zoom out to fit to 100%. We basically spaced out all of our little circles into the X-axis so that we can go ahead and push a camera right through the middle of them and take advantage of that to demonstrate what the zoom values and aperture and depth of field mean for the camera. So with this set up this way, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new camera. So I'll go layer, new, camera, and I'm going to create a 1-node camera this time. I am going to make it a 35mm camera, so nothing new there. And we're going to talk about these guys in more detail, but for those of you who have taken photography, these values should be fairly familiar. This is the way you control the depth of field and the focal length in your cameras. So you work with aperture, you work with the zoom value, and mostly for most people who are photographers, they do check the aperture of their cameras or the depth of field that they're trying to achieve through f-stops. So f-stop is the relationship between aperture and zoom value in your camera. I'm sorry, between aperture and the focal distance. So we're not going to talk about that in this class specifically, but that should give a frame of reference to those of you who have worked with lenses in photography. For us, though, we're going to be working with pixels, and it's going to be slightly easier to handle once we get into the actual camera settings. So let me click OK on this to accept the camera. You'll notice that this jumps a little bit, and that tells me that my camera focal length and my camera zoom are weird, which is what happened last time in class. Not weird, but they're not exactly what we need them to be. So if you look at my camera, I'm collapsing the camera values. I go to camera options, and you'll notice that by default, I get this 1244.4 zoom value and focal distance of 1244.4. The zoom value refers to the point at which distance from the lens, whatever object is at that distance, will be at exactly the size that it's supposed to be, at 100% the size. So if I have a camera that is at, let's say, 0 on the z-axis, and I have a zoom value of 1000, whatever happens to be at 1000 will be showing on my camera at the exact height and width that it is supposed to be, the pixel size. So if I have an item that is 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and I have placed it at 1000 pixels from the camera, and my camera is at 0, the Z position for the camera is 0, and the zoom value is 1000, then that rectangle, that 100 by 100 that I had placed at 1000 pixels, will be its appropriate size. It would be 100 by 100 in the camera. Okay, so that is basically what the zoom value is the value at which whatever is on focus, whatever is at that distance of zoom, is showing at the exact size that it's supposed to be. The depth of field is basically activating the ability to have the camera show blurriness in the distance as things get closer or far away from the focal point. Now that's the focal distance right here. The focus distance is the focal point. That is the distance between the front of my lens and the object that is on focus. So let me switch really quick to Illustrator so that I can show you what that means. Focal length is the distance between the lens and the subject that needs to be on focus. So if I have a focal point, a focus point, a focal distance of 1000 pixels, then whatever is at 1000 pixels from my camera will show on focus. That's basically what this does. Anything past that point or anything before that point will be blurry if the depth of field is activated. How blurry does it get? Well, that depends on the aperture. So if I increase my aperture to a number like, let's say 100, 150 pixels, then I start getting some natural blurriness depending on the type of scenario that I have. The higher this number is, the blurrier things get. So this number related to the focal distance is what determines the f-stop for that lens that you're working with. F-stop being a term that is used for photography, for those of you who have taken photography. So instead of working with f-stops in these cameras, in After Effects, we actually use pixels to determine what our focal, our blurriness is for the depth of field. So know that the higher the aperture number is, the blurrier things are going to get. That's basically the effect that this has once the depth of field is activated. So to make things a little bit easier, what I want to do at this point is with these camera values, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make everything an even number so that it is easier to digest. So for the zoom value, I am going to enter 1000 pixels. That's going to be my zoom value. You'll notice that my objects seem to be pushed back, and that's because I moved my zoom value further out. So I am not I am not zooming in as much as I was a second ago. A second ago it was 1244, now it's 1000, so I have less zoom. I am also going to change my focal distance to 1000 pixels. So that means that anything that is at 1000 pixels from my camera should be right on focus. Anything that is at 1000 pixels, because of the zoom, anything that is at 1000 pixels from my camera should be its proper size. And now I will change the aperture to, let's say, 100. Let's start with 150. Let's start with that number, 150 pixels. Now you notice that there's no change, and that's because I haven't activated my depth of field. So let me go ahead and activate it, turn it on, and you'll notice that the items get blurry right away. Okay, so with that said, let me go ahead and call the position value for this guy and maintain this position value open, and you'll notice that my camera's default value was negative 1244.4 on the z-axis. That means my camera is positioned on the z-axis at this value. If you compare that to the layers below it, these layers at 2000, 4000, 6000, and 8000, so I am pretty far away from all those layers. It only follows that if I have a zoom value of 1000, that if I were to enter a value on the z-axis of my camera of, say, 7000, then this layer, shape 1, should be right at the size that it's supposed to be. Meaning, if I enter a value here of 7000, my camera is going to push out towards the blast of the circles. And that should come into focus, and it should be the size that it's supposed to be when it was created. So this is the size of the original file. Now it's on focus because my focal distance happens to be 1000 pixels as well. So 1000 pixels from my camera is at 7000, so 1000 pixels from that is 8000. And if I look at the value for that shape position, that is 8000. So if I then, by the same token, move this to, say, 5000, then I am looking at the next layer, which is this one. Let me bring it in a little bit, and you'll notice that this one is sharp. It's at full size. The other one got blurry because it got pushed into the distance. So let me then reduce this to 3000. I'm moving my camera back, and you'll notice that the next circle came on sight, and it's sharp, and everything else behind it, it's blurry. Then let me move this to 1000. I moved the camera to 1000, and then the next circle became visible. It is sharp because it's 1000 pixels from, notice that this is 2000, my camera's at 1000. Since my zoom value is 1000, this is exactly where it's supposed to be to show at proper size, and the focal distance is 1000. Therefore, that means that this should be perfectly focused. Okay. So let's take a look at this in action so you can see actually how the blurriness happens. I'm noticing that my blurriness is pretty natural for depth of field. So 150 pixels is a good number, but I want to exaggerate this so that we can actually see blurriness before and after the focal point. So I am going to change this from 150 to 250. You'll notice an increase on blurriness in the background. And let me go ahead and start keyframing this. So I am going to push my camera to 7000 pixels. The last layer will be on focus. This one looks a little blurry. That's because I had applied motion blur to it on the layer itself so that the motion looks a little bit natural. And so I am going to keyframe the position of my camera at 7000 pixels. Then I am going to go down to the 2-second mark. And at the 2-second mark, I am going to move my camera to 5000 pixels. Now, this item here is on focus, and the one at 8000 pixels became blurry. I'm going to stick around here for a couple of seconds or a couple of frames. So after 2, I am going to go down to, let's say, 215. And I am going to create another keyframe to hold that position. And then I'm going to move down to 4 seconds. And at the 4-second mark, I am going to be moving from 5000 to 3000. That brings the next layer into focus. So I'm moving my camera back, as you can see. And as I'm moving my camera back, all of the circles that are behind me come into plain view, and they come into focus. And as they get pushed past the camera focal length, the focus distance, then they become blurry. Let me stick around this one for about a few seconds. Let's see, a couple of frames, and I'm just going to repeat that frame, and I'm going to go to 6. And then around 6, I am going to create another keyframe at 1000. Okay, and then I'm going to stick on that one for a while. I'm going to go all the way to 8 on that one, and so I'm going to create another keyframe. So the end result of that animation is as follows. Let me go ahead and render this. I'm going to put my endpoint at 8-second mark, and let me render this, and you'll see what the end result is. So if you notice, things come into focus, they stay in focus for a fraction of a second, and then they move on. That's basically what the focal point is allowing us to do. The depth of field is allowing us, and you'll notice that as the layers come into view, they are blurry. Take a look at what comes in. It's blurry until it gets into focus. Once it's on focus, it's sharp, and the focus is based on where my camera is with relation to the zoom value and to the focal distance. So if the focal distance is actually what's going to tell you what is sharp and what is not. The zoom is only used to make sure that things are the size that they're meant to be. If you need them to be smaller, you can always make your zoom smaller and make your focal distance bigger. That still retains the same, the equation remains the same. The distance between the focal point, the focus distance from the lens to the focal point is what determines what is in focus. And that is the value that you need to be paying attention to. The focal distance with relation to the Z position of the camera in this case. Okay? So that is focus, zoom, depth of field, and aperture. Okay? With that said, let me go ahead and jump into the exercise we were working on yesterday, which was how do I create an animation on a camera? How do I apply a path to a camera for motion and have it follow that path and animate a logo? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into this, to our original logo, the one that we worked on at the beginning of the semester. And obviously, it's something that you guys had seen already in class. It's the same layout that we had worked on. As you can see, it's all the layers that we had brought in class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything on this one, and I'm going to turn everything into 3D layers. So with that turned into 3D layers, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to put a floor on this. And to do that, I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to make that solid about 4 times the size of my composition, so that is a gigantic solid. To do that, I'll go ahead and click on the 1280, and I'm not good at math, so I'll simply say *4, and that automatically multiplies whatever this value is by 4, and it will give me the full size that I need. So 4 times the size. It's a pretty big solid in this case. I'll click OK. And my solid should cover everything because it's the top layer. Let me send it to the back. But I also need to turn it into a 3D layer so that I can manipulate it in 3D space. What I want to do right now is I'm going to rotate that solid on its axis, on its x-axis, so that I can go ahead and use it as a floor. So I made it 270 on the x-axis, and then I'm going to bring it down with the arrow until it's just cutting right below the Design Studio part of the logo, this point right here. So I'm just going to drop it right there. And so you'll notice how it cuts across the title. So literally think of it as a sheet of paper that I'm bringing down. And once it's below the text, then it will serve as floor for me. Next thing I want to do is I want to turn this view from top view to custom view so that you guys see what I created. Basically, this is my 3D logo space, and that is my floor all around it. That's the solid. Let me go back to active camera view. And what I'm going to do at this point is I am going to create a light. And the light is going to illuminate the logo, and it's going to project the shadow onto the floor. But we're going to run into a little snag here in just a second, and you'll see why. And I'll explain how to get out of that. So I'll go ahead and say layer new, light. I'm going to make it spotlight. I'm going to make it white, intensity 100%, cone angle 90. I want to make sure that I'm casting shadows. And then I'll click OK. And you'll notice that this turns into some funky color thing. It looks really weird. But the main thing, the thing that's of note is that I am not seeing the light affecting my logo, and that is because in real life black absorbs light. So unless you have some type of metallic sheen on your material, you will not be able to see the black. The black absorbs the light. So what we're going to do is I'm going to select all of my layers, and then I'm going to go to my effects window, and I am going to look for either a black and white effect or the hue saturation effect to change the color of this to light to white. So let me go ahead and let's use the hue saturation one. So I'll start typing hue saturation in my effects search window, and there it is, hue saturation. I can go ahead and then double click. Since all of these are selected, I'll double click the effect and it should have applied it to everything. If it doesn't, then no problem. Let's go ahead and fix it right after. I'm gonna go ahead and increase the lightness of my layer, and you'll notice that it seems like only the creative graphic was the one that received that effect. Nothing else did. Oh, actually they all did. Wow, okay. So I'm wondering why this is not colorizing. Let me go ahead and select this one then, since I've already worked on that one. I made the master lightness white. I should be able to copy that effect. So I'll select the effect label in the effects window, then go ahead and select all of the other layers and paste, and then they should all turn white, the same as the creative graphics. Everything should be white. Now, why is it white and why do we see these colors? Because they're being illuminated by the light. So now I can control the light. Let me go ahead and select the light and move it on the Z-axis so that I can pull it out from the logo, and you'll notice that I now control the way the light is interacting with the logo itself. Let me go ahead and open up the light settings, the light options, and let me increase the cone feather for that light so that I get some smooth edges on the sides. Now let me switch that view from active camera to custom view, and you'll notice that I'm getting a pretty decent effect on the way this looks. I am actually getting good lighting on my logo. What I notice is that nothing is projecting shadows, and that's because even though we told the light to project shadows, remember we said when we created it, cast shadows is on, as you can see over here. Every one of the layers needs to be tagged to say, hey, you will have you need to cast shadows as well. So let me select them all. Let me open up the top one. Let me go to its material options and make sure that I select cast shadows on for that one, because all of them were selected. All of them start casting shadows right away. So selecting all layers and only changing one of the material options for one will affect all of the layers that you have selected at the same time. So you see now that I have really nice shadows behind this. There's some kind of what looks like almost like a occlusion over here. Really nice light effect on this. And if I move my light, you'll notice that the shadows will respond accordingly behind the logo. So that done, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go back to my active camera view. So I'm looking at this from the front, and I am going to create a camera. So layer, new, camera. I'm going to make this camera this time a 2-node camera, so the camera has a focal point of where the logo is. Remember, we made the logo 3D, but we never changed its position. So the position of all those layers on the Z-axis is 0. If I create a 2-node camera, the camera by default will, the focal point, the point of interest to that camera will by default be at the 0 point on the Z-axis. So 2-node camera. And now I'm going to make this one a 35mm. That's fine. Click OK. And now I have my camera. I don't see it, but when I go to my custom view 1, I see my camera has been placed there. So now let me go ahead and switch back to my active view camera, select my camera layer, call its position value, and now let me go to Illustrator and copy a path that I had created, a half a circle path that I had created earlier. So I'll select that half a circle, Control C. Then I'll go to the camera position value. I'll select it, and then I'll paste it into that position value. Now you'll notice that things changed, and that's because my camera is now based on that specific path. If you let me zoom out a little bit, you'll see that the path is where the camera is, and if I move it, my camera is following the path as expected, and you'll notice that it's looking at this central point. You see that light connecting the camera to that point? That is the point of interest. That's where the camera focus is in this case, because it's a 2-node camera. That is the point of interest. So the camera is following the path as we expected. Now what I'm going to do at this point is, obviously it's going underneath the logo. It's not going in front or around the logo, which is what I wanted to do. And that is because once you, as I explained yesterday, when you paste the path to the position attribute of the camera or of any object, basically you're going to paste it as if you were looking at it from the front view. If you really want to turn this into 3D space, then we need to use a null object to parent that into the camera and then turn the whole world for the camera 90 degrees. So how do we do that? With the camera selected, let me go ahead and create a new null object. And there's my null object. By the way, you go layer, new, null object. I just used the shortcut. Let me go ahead and make that null object a 3D object. And then let me make the camera a child of the null object. So now the camera will obey whatever the null object tells it to do. Now with the null object selected, I am going to change its rotation value. And I'm going to change its orientation on the x-axis from 0 to 270. And you'll notice that the null object rotated. Let me undo that so you can see the position and why I chose the x-axis. Red arrow is the x-axis. Green arrow is the y-axis. Blue arrow is the z-axis. So obviously I want to rotate as if the x-axis was a hinge. And I'm going to use it to rotate it on the orientation value. I'm going to use the x-axis. And I'm going to make it -90 or 270. Remember, rotation only counts from 0 to 359. So now that I have this rotated up to 270 degrees, I can go ahead and select my camera, and you'll notice that my path turned around 90 degrees. So now my camera is going around my logo, which is what we wanted it to do. So with that done, I don't need the null object anymore. But before I delete it, I want to go ahead and remove the parenting from the camera. So I'll select the camera, go to its parent, drop down and select none so that my camera is on its own. And then I can delete that null object. I don't need it anymore. Or you can hide it if you want to keep it just in case you want to use it later. Now what I want to do right now is examine what my camera's rotation is doing to the camera visual. And it looks like the camera is constantly looking at the point of interest. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and switch my view to the actual camera. So let me fit to 100%, and from custom view I'm going to change this to camera 1, and you'll notice that my camera is behind my logo, and it's as I scrub I am coming around and my logo is really close to the camera, as you can see. So what do we do at this point? How do I fix this? Well, remember at the beginning of this tutorial I told you that if you look at your zoom value for the camera and the position of the camera itself, then you should be able to control where this logo looks at 100% its size. So let's take a look at the values. Let me go ahead and open up the camera options and look at all the values that we have for zoom, focal distance, and depth of field. We might not need depth of field on this one, but I'm going to keep it on just for now. I'm also going to look at the position value for this and point of interest. So I am going to keep the position and point of interest open along with the camera options. At the same time, I want to see where this unique layer happens to be on the z-axis. So you notice that on the z-axis it's at 0. I know that my camera now is at negative 794.7 pixels. That's where the position of my camera is. The unique is at 0. My point of interest is at 0. So if my camera's position is negative 794.7, but my zoom value is 1244.4, then my zoom value is 500 plus pixels further out than it should be. This value here should be the same value as the Z value of my position for the camera. Why? Because I am looking at the world on the Z plane. So if my position for the camera is 794.7, it only follows that the zoom value for this objects to be at their proper size should be positive 794. So if I go 794.7, that should pull my camera out, and the item will be the size that it's supposed to be. However, if you notice, let me go in a little bit, and you'll notice that my items are slightly, actually they're pretty sharp, but they're slightly out of focus if you look at them in detail, and that is because my focal distance is yet larger than my zoom value. Now, if I increase my aperture right now to 250, which is what we did before, this thing is everything is gonna get blurry, and that is because my focal distance right now is at 1244. If I want this to be in focus, then my focal distance should be the counter to the distance in the Z-axis from the camera. So that should be 794.7, 794.7 pixels. When I enter that value for zoom, then my items become sharp. They come into focus. They completely come into focus, and now everything is as we intended it to be from the beginning. So you would control the zoom value to match the distance on the Z-axis, and the same applies for the focal distance on the camera, so that you remove the blurriness if you're using depth of field like we are in this case. If you're not using depth of field, then the focal distance doesn't matter, because then if you turn off the depth of field, everything comes into focus. Everything will be sharp. It doesn't matter if it's 10,000 pixels from the camera or if it's 100 pixels from it. Everything is going to look sharp, as you just saw. I just turned it off and everything became sharp. But if I turn on the depth of field, then it's truly looking at this as if it was looking through a camera, and that's how you get the true 3D effects that you're looking for. Now, before I close this, I want to get to the middle keyframe, and I want to stop my animation at that point. If I continue, it'll go around, because that's the path that I applied for the motion for this particular layer, for this particular camera, I'm sorry. So if I want to stop the animation here, you'll notice there are keyframes. So if I select my last keyframe and I delete it, then my animation should stop at that point. And if I stretch these keyframes out, let me go ahead and move this keyframe out to 4 seconds. Then I'll put my endpoint at 6 seconds. If I do a quick render of this, this is basically the end result. Let's take a look at this. Now this is going to take a while because of all the depth of field, and it's truly calculating what in real life this would look like with an actual lens. So when it's getting too big like this and it's taking forever to render, you have options to control what you render within your preview window. You could actually stop the render so that you're not overtaxing your computer, and you can say, okay, I don't want to render every single one of the frames. I can go ahead and skip every 2 frames. And if you do that, it's only going to render every 3 frames. And it's going to look a little jumpy, but it's going to render a little faster. So let's go ahead and try that, and you'll notice that there should be an increase on the speed at which this renders. Now I'm also going to change this from full to half quality, and I'm going to create the animation right now. You'll notice how the thing is just skipping. Oh, it's skipping 20 frames. Sorry, I entered 20 frames. I actually meant to enter 2 frames. So let me re-render this. And you'll notice that there is quite a significant increase on the speed. As you'll notice, the animation comes into view. And then at this point, I can go ahead and affect everything that I want into the animation. So say, for example, if I wanted the light to do something, as this is turning, I can go ahead and go to the light and keyframe its position if that's what I was looking to do. Perhaps, let's see, position right here, and then I'll go to the 5-second mark and position, move this way or something to that effect. Let's see what that does for us. So it creates a little bit more visual interest, more motion as the animation happens. Okay, so I hope this explains the elements that we have been working with cameras in class, and I know some of you were kind of desperate because you guys wanted to include this within your logo exercise and most importantly within your projects. So this should clarify all of the concepts that we have been talking about for the past 2 weeks regarding cameras. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out and I'll go ahead and do my best to answer. Talk to you guys soon.